The alarm clock screamed at me like it held a personal grudge. 6:30 in the morning on my 45th birthday, and honestly, that felt about right. I rolled over in our king-sized bed, immediately regretting the movement as my back reminded me that sleeping next to someone who treated me like a stranger wasn't doing my spine any favors. Outside our bedroom window, the city was already alive with morning traffic. Horns honking, brakes screeching, and the occasional shout from drivers who'd clearly given up on basic civility. Welcome to another day in paradise, I thought, staring at the ceiling. 45 years old. Half a lifetime spent, and what did I have to show for it? A wife who barely acknowledged my existence, a job that paid the bills but inspired nobody, and a family-in-law who treated me like their personal comedy relief. The space next to me was already empty and cold. Sabine had probably been at the gym since 5, maintaining that perfect figure she reminded me was essential for her career. Because God forbid her husband's wife looked anything less than magazine-ready for her social media posts. I shuffled toward the kitchen in my worn-out pajamas, the uniform of a man who'd stopped trying to impress anyone before breakfast. The coffee maker gurgled to life, and I stood there waiting for my daily dose of liquid motivation, wondering when exactly I'd become invisible in my own life. If you wanted a masterclass in looking down on people, the Blackwell family could teach advanced courses. Sabine had married into their world of old money and older attitudes, where success was measured by your zip code and your ability to make others feel small. Isolde Blackwell, Sabine's mother, had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. She could deliver a cutting remark with such sweet precision that you'd find yourself bleeding before you even realized you'd been stabbed. "Oh, Justin," she'd say with that smile that never reached her eyes. "It's so refreshing to meet someone who's comfortable with simple pleasures. Not everyone needs to aim high in life." Then there was Garrick, the family patriarch who treated every conversation like he was holding court. The man had made his fortune in commercial real estate decades ago and had been dining out on those glory days ever since. Still pushing papers around that office, sport, he'd boom whenever he saw me, slapping my back hard enough to leave bruises. Well, not everyone can be an entrepreneur, right? But the real piece of work was Corvin, Sabine's younger brother. He worked for some investment firm downtown and treated every family gathering like an opportunity to remind everyone how much more successful he was than his pathetic brother-in-law. The guy was a walking business card, all buzzwords and fake enthusiasm about disrupting markets and leveraging opportunities. They'd turned making me feel worthless into a family sport, and I'd been playing along for years. The thing about being consistently underestimated is that it gives you incredible freedom to operate under everyone's radar. While they were all busy looking down their noses at me, I'd been building something they couldn't even imagine. I'd become an expert at playing the role they wanted me to play. The self-deprecating husband who was just grateful to be included in their shiny world. The guy who laughed along when they made jokes at my expense and never fought back when they questioned my worth. But here's what they didn't know. Every sheepish grin was calculated, every moment of apparent weakness was a choice, and every time I let them think they'd won was actually me gathering information for something bigger. I'd perfected the art of being invisible in plain sight. While they were congratulating themselves on their superiority, I was watching, listening, and mentally cataloging every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment when they revealed who they really were beneath their polished exteriors. The mask of the doormat had become so convincing that sometimes I even forgot I was wearing it. But underneath, something else had been growing, something they were completely unprepared for. Because while they saw Justin the failure, Justin the disappointment, Justin the guy who somehow tricked their precious Sabine into marriage, I'd been building an empire they couldn't even comprehend. True Voices started as a simple blog 5 years ago. I wrote under a pseudonym about emotional abuse, toxic family dynamics, and the special kind of hell that comes from being treated like a punching bag by people who claim to love you. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out, sharing their own stories and finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't the problem. The blog grew into a forum, then a support network, then a full platform with resources, counseling referrals, and a community of survivors. We had support groups, educational content, and most importantly, a place where people could speak their truth without fear of being dismissed or mocked. The numbers were staggering. Over 2 million registered users, millions more who read without signing up, and a social media following that major corporations would kill for. I'd been featured in psychology journals, quoted by therapists, and invited to speak at conferences. The platform generated enough revenue to fund itself and then some, but I kept that money in a separate account, maintaining my secret identity. Every morning, I checked the platform stats while Sabine got ready for work. Messages from people whose lives had been changed by finding their voice, their strength, their community. "Thank you for saving my life," one would read. "I finally had the courage to leave," said another. These messages were better than any birthday card I'd ever received. I finished my coffee and pulled out my phone to check the morning stats. The numbers were incredible: 2.1 million active users, with engagement rates that would make any social media manager weep with joy. The overnight messages were flooding in as usual. "Your post about setting boundaries saved my marriage," one user wrote. Another said, "I showed my therapist your article about gaslighting and finally understood what my family was doing to me. But today felt different. Maybe it was turning 45, or maybe it was the message I'd received last night from a teenager who said true voices had kept her from ending her life. Or maybe I just finally reached my breaking point with playing the fool." I scrolled through the community forums, watching people support each other through their darkest moments. They were finding strength they didn't know they had, setting boundaries they'd never thought possible, and building lives free from the toxic people who'd held them back. And here I was, the founder of this incredible movement, still pretending to be the family joke so I wouldn't rock the boat. Tonight was my birthday party. Sabine had been planning it for weeks, though I knew it wasn't really about celebrating me. It was about showing off to her social circle, proving that even married to a disappointment like me, she could still throw an impressive event. But today felt like the day I stopped being their entertainment and started being myself. Sabine glided into the kitchen like she was walking a runway, fresh from her morning workout and looking like she'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail that probably took 20 minutes to achieve that effortless look. She was wearing one of those designer athletic outfits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything about Sabine screamed success, sophistication, and "I definitely married beneath me, but I'm making the best of it." "Morning, honey," she chirped, giving me a kiss on the cheek that felt about as genuine as a campaign promise. "Big day today. I can't wait for tonight's party. Everyone's going to be there." She rattled off the guest list like I should be impressed that various social media influencers and business associates were gracing us with their presence. To Sabine, every social gathering was essentially a business meeting, and I was expected to play the role of the supportive but invisible husband. "Did you pick up your suit from the dry cleaner?" she asked, scrolling through her phone while talking to me. "I told them to make sure it fits properly. We can't have you looking." She paused, searching for the diplomatic way to say, "like the disappointment you are." "Frumpy," I suggested helpfully. "I was going to say casual," she replied with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "You know how important first impressions are, right? Because God forbid I embarrass Sabine in front of her precious contacts." Later that morning, Isolde called to discuss final arrangements for the party. Even over the phone, her voice carried that particular tone of condescension that could make you feel small from 3 time zones away. "Justin, darling," she cooed, "I do hope you're prepared for tonight. We have some very important people coming, and first impressions matter so much in Sabine's line of work." There it was, less than 2 minutes into the conversation, and she'd already managed to remind me that I was essentially a liability that needed to be managed. The woman had a gift for making every interaction feel like a performance review I was failing. "I've taken the liberty of having a few conversation topics prepared for you," she continued. "Nothing too challenging, of course. Perhaps you could talk about your hobby projects or that little job of yours. Keep things light and humble." Humble. That was Isolde's favorite word when it came to me. It was her polite way of saying, know your place and stay in it. "Of course, we all understand that not everyone can be a high achiever," she said with that poisonous sweetness that was her trademark. "But there's dignity in honest work, isn't there? Even if it's not particularly ambitious." I smiled as I hung up, my hand moving unconsciously to check the device in my pocket. Tonight, Isolde was going to discover just how ambitious the quiet guy they'd been mocking really was. Garrick showed up at our house around noon, presumably to help with party preparations, but really to hold court and remind everyone within earshot of his past glories. The man never met a voice that couldn't be louder or an opinion that couldn't be more forcefully expressed. "Justin, my boy," he boomed, slapping my back with enough force to rattle my teeth. "Ready for the big celebration tonight? 45 years. That's quite an accomplishment for someone in your position." He delivered this with his usual mix of condescension and false heartiness, like he was congratulating a child for tying their shoes correctly. Everything Garrick said sounded like he was dispensing wisdom from on high to the less fortunate masses. "You know, back in my day," he continued, settling into our best chair like he owned the place, "a man your age would have built something by now. An empire, a legacy, something to show for all those years of hard work." He gestured around our living room with the air of someone surveying a disappointing real estate investment. But I suppose not everyone has the vision for big deals and bold moves. Some people are just comfortable with smaller dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Garrick was lecturing me about building legacies, I'd been quietly constructing something that helped millions of people rebuild their lives after being torn down by families exactly like his. Tonight, he was going to learn what a real legacy looked like. Corvin arrived in his usual style: expensive suit, expensive car, and enough arrogance to fill both. He worked in high-stakes finance and never let anyone forget it, treating every family gathering like an opportunity to remind us all how much more successful he was than his pathetic brother-in-law. "Hey, Justin," he said with that smirk that made me want to introduce his face to the nearest wall. "Still coordinating those projects? That's cool, man." Not everyone can handle the pressure of real responsibility. He launched into his standard routine about swimming with sharks and disrupting markets, making sure everyone knew that while I was pushing papers, he was out there making real money and living the dream. "You should think bigger, Justin," he said, pulling out his phone to show me photos from some yacht party he'd attended. "Take some risks, you know? Life's too short to play it safe all the time." The condescension dripped from every word. In Corvin's universe, I was the cautionary tale of what happened when you didn't have the courage to chase success. He saw me as the family's designated underachiever, the guy who'd settled for mediocrity while he reached for the stars. What Corvin didn't know was that while he'd been busy making noise about his deals and his lifestyle, I'd been quietly building something that actually mattered. Something that had changed more lives in 5 years than his investment portfolio ever would. The Grandview Ballroom was exactly the kind of place that screamed, "We have money, and we want everyone to know it." Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like expensive tears, casting sparkles across marble floors that probably cost more than most people's houses. Sabine had outdone herself booking a venue this fancy for a guy who considered chain restaurants a splurge. But this wasn't really about me anyway. It was about her image, her network, her opportunity to show off to the kind of people who measured worth by the size of your bank account. I stood in the doorway wearing my freshly dry-cleaned suit, the same navy blue one I'd worn to every fancy event for the past 3 years. The whole ensemble screamed middle management trying his best, which was probably exactly the vibe Sabine was going for. The guest list was a who's who of people I either barely knew or actively disliked. Sabine's work friends clustered near the bar, all perfect teeth and practiced laughs. Business partners, social media influencers, and various members of the local elite who treated networking like a blood sport. I could see Mrs. Henderson from the country club, holding court near the champagne fountain, and the Morrison family claiming a prime table because heaven forbid they sit anywhere that didn't scream importance. And there was Sabine, absolutely radiant in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, working the room like a politician during election season. I played my part perfectly, smiling and nodding my way through introductions as the grateful birthday boy who was just happy to be included. "This is my husband, Justin," Sabine would say, and I could hear the subtle emphasis that somehow made it sound like charity case. The weight of every eye in the room felt physical. Conversations quieted as we passed, and I caught fragments of whispered comments. "That's Sabine's husband. He's in middle management. I wonder how she ended up with him." I nodded and smiled, letting their dismissive comments wash over me while mentally cataloging every condescending gesture, every moment of casual cruelty disguised as polite conversation. The device in my pocket felt warm against my fingers. But here's the thing about being consistently underestimated. It gives you incredible freedom to observe. While everyone was busy not taking me seriously, I was watching, listening, and preparing for something they couldn't even imagine. A waiter offered me champagne from a tray that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I accepted it with a smile, checking my phone discreetly. The True Voices community was already buzzing with anticipation. Over 800,000 people were logged into the platform, waiting to see what their anonymous founder had planned. Tonight, their perfect little stage was about to become my spotlight. Garrick stood up with his wine glass raised, commanding attention like the force of nature he believed himself to be. When Garrick Blackwell had something to say, you listened or you found yourself permanently uninvited from future gatherings. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, his voice carrying across the entire ballroom. I'd like to propose a toast to our guest of honor tonight. He gestured toward me with his glass, and suddenly every eye in the room was pointed in my direction like spotlights. 45 years for our dear Justin, and what a journey it's been. The pause was perfectly timed for maximum dramatic effect. I've known Justin for 8 years now, and I can honestly say he's been consistent. The way he said consistent made it sound like a terminal diagnosis. The crowd chuckled appreciatively because when Garrick made a joke, you laughed or you found yourself socially exiled. He's a good man, Garrick continued, really warming to his theme now. Steady, reliable, never complains. The kind of guy who shows up every day and does his job, even if that job isn't exactly, well, let's just say he's found his level. More laughter, getting louder now as people sensed blood in the water. I could see phones coming out because apparently my public humiliation was worth documenting for social media. I felt my hand move to the device in my pocket, steady and sure. Sabine rose from her seat like a queen addressing her subjects, her red dress catching the light from the chandeliers. The room went quiet in anticipation as she smiled at the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew she had everyone's complete attention. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, her voice clear and carrying easily across the room. "But I think Justin deserves something really special tonight. After all, it's not every day someone turns 45. She paused, looking around the room with a smile that made my blood run cold. I'd seen that expression before, usually right before she delivered some perfectly calculated piece of cruelty disguised as loving concern. "I've prepared a little slideshow to celebrate my wonderful husband," she announced, gesturing toward the projection screen that was descending from the ceiling like a guillotine blade. The crowd murmured appreciatively. This was exactly the kind of entertainment they'd come for. Sophisticated people having sophisticated fun at someone else's expense. "Don't worry, honey," Sabine said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I promise this will be unforgettable." She had no idea how right she was about to be. I felt the device in my pocket, warm and ready. Over 1 million people were now logged into True Voices Live, waiting to see how their anonymous host would handle whatever was coming next. The real show was about to begin. The projection screen flickered to life, and what appeared on it made my stomach drop through the marble floor. Sabine hadn't just prepared a slideshow. She'd crafted a masterpiece of psychological warfare disguised as birthday entertainment. The words blazed across the screen in letters large enough for everyone to read. Impotent. The silence was deafening as every person in the ballroom absorbed that particular piece of our private medical struggles being broadcast for entertainment. Divorced failure appeared next, referencing my first marriage that had ended badly when I was young and stupid enough to think love could conquer financial stress. Sabine knew exactly how much that failure still stung. High school dropout followed. Technically true if you ignored the part where I'd gotten my GED and worked through community college while holding down 2 jobs. Low income sparked the first wave of laughter from the crowd. These people probably spent more on wine in a month than I made in salary. Then came the final blow. Latest single. Sabine had turned my birthday party into her divorce announcement, letting everyone know she was mentally checked out and ready to upgrade. The crowd burst into full-blown laughter now, the kind of cruel, delighted cackling that happens when people think they're witnessing comedy instead of cruelty. Glasses clinked in celebration of Sabine's wit, and the whole room vibrated with collective joy at watching someone get annihilated. "Don't laugh too much," Sabine called out to the crowd, her voice carrying over the noise with perfect comedic timing. "He might cry." The room roared even louder. People were actually applauding now, like they'd just witnessed the greatest stand-up routine in history instead of watching a woman publicly humiliate her husband on his birthday. I caught glimpses of faces in the crowd, some laughing so hard they were wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding appreciatively at Sabine's clever presentation. A few looked uncomfortable, but weren't about to speak up and ruin the fun. Garrick was practically glowing with pride at his daughter's performance. He nudged the man sitting next to him and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Just a joke, right? All in good fun. That's our Sabine. Never misses a chance to keep things entertaining." Corbin was recording the whole thing on his phone, probably planning to share it on social media with some captions about family roasts and birthday humor. The little weasel was eating this up, finally getting to see his loser brother-in-law put in his place. Isolde sat at the head table looking like she'd just won the lottery, her wine glass raised in a mock toast to my public execution. This was probably exactly what she thought I deserved for having the audacity to marry into their family. But while they were all laughing and congratulating Sabine on her wit, I felt something inside me shift. The anger that had been building for years crystallized into something harder, sharper, more focused than rage. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out like they probably expected me to. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small device, holding it up so everyone could see it clearly. The laughter was still echoing around the room, but something in my posture must have changed because I noticed a few people starting to quiet down. There was something different in the air, a shift in energy that some of the more perceptive guests were beginning to pick up on. I looked directly at Sabine, who was still basking in the applause and appreciation from her audience. Her smile was radiant with the satisfaction of a performance well delivered, but I could see confusion starting to creep in around the edges as she noticed my calm demeanor. "Thank you, Sabine," I said, my voice cutting through the lingering laughter like a knife through silk. That was illuminating, but I actually prepared something too. The effect was immediate. The laughter died so suddenly it was like someone had flipped a switch. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the wait staff stopped moving, sensing that something had fundamentally shifted in the room's energy. "You see," I continued, my voice steady and carrying easily through the silent ballroom. "I've learned a lot about storytelling over the years, and every good story needs a twist." I smiled at the crowd, feeling genuinely calm for the first time in years. I pressed a button on the device, and the projector screen flickered like it was having a seizure. Sabine's cruel slideshow dissolved into digital static before going completely black. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of air conditioning and confused murmuring from the crowd. Then slowly, like dawn breaking over a battlefield, a new image began to materialize on the screen. The True Voices Live logo appeared first, clean white letters against a deep blue background, with a microphone icon that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Below it, numbers began scrolling upward in real time. 1,247,832. 1,248,951. 1,249,164. The live viewer count was climbing by the second, and I could feel confusion radiating from the crowd as they tried to process what they were seeing. "What the hell is this?" Corvin muttered, his phone still in his hand from recording what he'd thought was going to be my complete humiliation. The smug expression had vanished from his face, replaced by bewildered irritation. A chat box appeared on the right side of the screen, messages flowing upward like a digital waterfall of support. "We're here for you," scrolled past in bold letters. "Time to speak your truth," followed close behind. The messages were coming so fast they were almost impossible to read individually, but the sentiment was crystal clear. Sabine's face had gone from triumphant to confused to something approaching panic. She was staring at the screen like it had personally betrayed her. "Justin," she said, her voice tight with forced calm. "What is this? What's happening?" I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent ballroom. Every eye in the room was on me now, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like they were looking at me like some kind of amusing curiosity. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, "I'd like you to meet the real Justin. Not the sad project coordinator you've been laughing at, not the disappointment who married above his station, but the man I actually am when I'm not pretending to be the person you want me to be. I gestured toward the screen where the viewer count had crossed 1.3 million and showed no signs of slowing down. For the past 5 years, while you've all been treating me like your personal entertainment, I've been building something that actually matters. The murmuring in the crowd was getting louder now, but not in the approving way they'd been doing during Sabine's slideshow. This was the nervous whispering of people who were beginning to realize they'd seriously miscalculated something important. True Voices is a platform for people who've experienced exactly what you've all witnessed tonight. Toxic family dynamics, emotional abuse, and the special kind of cruelty that comes disguised as love and concern. Garrick's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. What the hell are you talking about, Justin? This is ridiculous. Is it, Garrick? I interrupted, and the fact that I'd interrupted him at all seemed to shock him into silence. Let me ask you something. Do you remember what you said about me last Christmas when you thought no one else was listening? The color drained from Garrick's face as I continued. You see, the thing about being treated like furniture is that people tend to forget you're there. They say things around you that they'd never say if they remembered you were actually listening. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. True Voices has over 2 million registered users. People from all over the world who've dealt with families like mine. Families who think love comes with conditions and respect has to be earned through submission. The crowd was starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Whatever tolerance they'd had for family teasing was evaporating as they realized this wasn't going in the direction they'd expected. And my community, these million-plus people watching right now, they've been waiting to hear what a toxic family really sounds like when they think no one's recording. Isolde found her voice first, though it came out strangled. You've been recording us? That's illegal. Actually, it's not. I replied, giving her the same condescending smile she'd been giving me for years. Single-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, and that would be me, it's perfectly legal. I could see people checking their phones, probably Googling True Voices to see if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Others were looking toward the exits like they were starting to regret their decision to attend. The chat on the screen was exploding with messages of support and outrage on my behalf, scrolling by faster than the system could display them. A wave of gasps swept through the ballroom as the first audio clip began to play through the premium sound system. It was Sabine's voice from last month's dinner, when she thought I was upstairs taking a shower. He's absolutely pathetic, mother, her recorded voice said, the public sweetness completely stripped away. Sometimes I look at him and wonder how I ended up married to such a complete loser. He shuffles around like a beaten dog and acts grateful just to be acknowledged. The live Sabine went white as a sheet, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the marble floor. Around the room, her business partners, the very people she'd been trying to impress, were exchanging horrified glances. I only married him because he was easy to control. The recording continued. He's like a puppy that's been kicked so many times it just rolls over whenever you raise your voice. It's honestly disgusting how grateful he is for basic human decency. The laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier was completely gone, replaced by the kind of uncomfortable silence that made people avoid eye contact. Mrs. Henderson was staring at her lap. Senator Wade's wife had gone from charming political smile to stone-faced disapproval. But the recording wasn't finished. Isolde's voice joined the conversation, and if Sabine's words were cruel, her mother's were surgical in their precision. Oh, darling, you don't need to tell me. The man is utterly worthless. What use is a man who can't even give us grandchildren? I watched Isolde's face crumple as her own words came back to haunt her. The online reaction was instant and overwhelming. The chat exploded with outrage, support messages flying by too fast to read individually. Within minutes, #TrueVoicesLive was trending worldwide, with clips of the recordings being shared across every social media platform. My phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. News outlets were requesting interviews, book publishers were reaching out, and speaking bureaus were offering contracts. The story was spreading faster than wildfire, and the world was listening. But more importantly, the community I'd built was rallying around this moment. Survivors of toxic families everywhere were sharing their own stories, using this public revelation as a catalyst for their own liberation. The platform wasn't just exposing one family's cruelty. It was creating a global conversation about emotional abuse. Disgusting people, one message read as it scrolled by. How could they say that? Said another. You deserve so much better, followed close behind. The support from complete strangers was more genuine than anything I'd received from my own family in years. These people understood what it felt like to be treated like garbage by people who were supposed to love you, and they were celebrating this moment of truth. Meanwhile, around the ballroom, I could see Sabine's business associates whispering among themselves. Based on their expressions, they weren't planning any future collaborations with someone who'd just been exposed as an emotional abuser to over 1 million people. The tide had turned completely. This wasn't their show anymore, it was mine. The implosion was swift and spectacular. Garrick stood up so violently he knocked over his chair, his face purple with rage. This is outrageous. You can't just record people without their knowledge. But I can, I said calmly. And I did. For months. Every cruel comment, every casual insult, every moment when you thought it was okay to treat me like garbage because I was too polite to fight back. Isolde was sputtering, trying to form words, but only managing strangled sounds. The woman who'd perfected the art of the cutting remark was discovering what it felt like to be speechless with shock. Corbin was already heading for the exit, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to do damage control with his firm. The guy who'd spent years bragging about swimming with sharks was discovering that some waters were too dangerous even for him. But Sabine was the most spectacular meltdown of all. She stood in the center of the ballroom in her expensive red dress, screaming at me while the microphones picked up every ugly word. You're pathetic, she shrieked. This is just bitter revenge because you know I'm right. You know you're a failure. The irony was beautiful. Even in this moment, even with her world crashing down around her, she couldn't stop herself from proving exactly why I'd needed to escape. Actually, Sabine, I said, my voice carrying clearly through her tantrum, I'm not bitter. I'm just done. Done pretending to be the man you needed me to be so you could feel better about yourself. My phone was buzzing with notifications from Sabine's business partners and clients. The messages were coming in fast. Contracts being terminated, partnerships dissolved, speaking engagements canceled. Her carefully built PR empire was crumbling in real time as people distanced themselves from someone who'd just been exposed as an emotional abuser to a global audience. Sabine, I'm sorry, but we can't move forward with the Henderson account, read one text from her biggest client. After tonight's revelation, we feel it's best to part ways. Another message. The senator's wife asked me to inform you that your services are no longer needed for the charity gala. Good luck with everything. One by one, the people she'd worked so hard to impress were cutting ties, protecting their own reputations by severing connections with someone who'd been exposed as cruel and abusive. The social climbing she'd dedicated her life to was turning into a spectacular fall from grace. Meanwhile, my own phone was exploding with opportunities. Publishers wanting to discuss book deals, speaking bureaus offering contracts, media outlets requesting exclusive interviews. The platform I'd built in secret was suddenly the most talked-about resource in the world. True Voices had gained over 500,000 new users in the past hour alone. The global conversation about toxic families that I'd started was becoming a movement, and everyone wanted to be part of it. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Her world ending, mine beginning. I walked to the center of the ballroom, addressing both the stunned crowd and the million-plus people watching online. The room was silent except for Sabine's diminishing sobs and the distant sound of cars honking outside. You called me a failure, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the space. You said I had no ambition, no vision, no worth. But while you were busy mocking me, I built something that actually matters. I gestured toward the screen where messages of support continued to flood in from around the world. True Voices has helped millions of people escape toxic relationships, find their self-worth, and build healthy boundaries with family members who treat them like garbage. The numbers on the screen spoke for themselves. 2.3 million users and growing, thousands of success stories, countless lives changed for the better. I built this while you laughed. I created something meaningful while you created nothing but pain. Garrick opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. For the first time in 8 years, he actually listened. The difference between us, I continued, is that I used my pain to help others heal. You used yours to hurt people who couldn't fight back. I built bridges. You built walls. I created community. You created isolation. I looked around the ballroom one final time, at the wreckage of their perfect evening and their shattered illusions about who held the real power in this family. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your acceptance or your love or your respect. I have something better. I have the knowledge that I built something greater than any of you ever could. I walked toward the ballroom exit through complete silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a satisfied audience, but the stunned hush of people who'd just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. Behind me, I could hear the soft sounds of my family's world cracking apart. Sabine's quiet crying, Isolde's whispered phone calls, Garrick's muttered curses. But ahead of me, my phone was exploding with a different kind of noise. Messages of support from the True Voices community, congratulations from fellow survivors, and opportunities from people who recognized the value of what I'd built. Your courage tonight inspired me to finally leave my toxic marriage, read one message. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like, said another. The doorman held the exit open for me, and as I stepped out into the cool night air, I heard something I hadn't expected, applause. Not from the ballroom behind me, but from my phone, where over 1 million people were celebrating this moment of liberation. Book publishers were already reaching out with offers. Speaking bureaus wanted to discuss tours. News outlets were requesting exclusive interviews. The secret empire I'd built was about to become very public, very profitable, and very powerful. I had walked into that ballroom as Justin the disappointment, the family joke, the guy who was lucky to be tolerated by his betters. I was leaving as Justin Grant, founder of True Voices, advocate for millions, and living proof that the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Divorce papers ready for filing. Financial forensics complete. You're going to be just fine. For the first time in years, I smiled and meant it. I was finally free.